the early risers and those who maybe didn't party so hard last night. We've given it a few moments for people to trickle in because we had some room changes. So if I can ask people to settle down, take a comfortable seat and enjoy the ride for the next hour, that would be fantastic. I am Samira Mehra, the Collective Intelligence and Advocacy Director at WINGS. WINGS is the global network for philanthropy support and development organizations, and I am delighted to welcome you to this session on partnering with philanthropy for higher quality innovative finance. And we're co-hosting this with our partners, the African Development Bank, Foundations 20, Institute of Climate and Society, and Finance and Commons. Or let me translate that in language that I've heard this space really enjoys, which is the language of acronyms. So AFDB, F20, X, FIX, and WINGS are delighted to have you at this conversation. I'd like to set the introduction against the backdrop that we have all found ourselves in and that we've been hearing over the course of day one. Growing and interconnected challenges, so climate disasters, pandemics, conflict, economic instability, all of which are transcending borders and all of which are really demanding that we have global coordinated action. And yet, at the same time, we're witnessing tectonic shifts in international cooperation. Development aid is shrinking at an alarming rate. It's not just developments this year with USAID cancellations, UK, Netherlands, Belgium cutting back on aid. This has been happening for the past few years. And what this means for philanthropy is that it's being increasingly called upon to step in. And while it can play a critical role, it simply cannot replace government commitments. So for us, these trends signal more than just a temporary funding gap. They signal a fundamental shift. And one of the shifts is that these complex challenges, these complex systems require coordination, and they require collaborations and coalitions that address root issues. So what we're really hearing, I think, is the need to shape a new vision, one that redefines how we finance solutions for common good. And that's where collaboration across sectors, government, private sector, civil society, and philanthropy really come into play, not only to bridge these gaps, but also set up for a more sustainable future. So what does this mean? So first, we need to expand the pool of available resources. It means that we need new models of financing, and we need more actors to be involved. And from the philanthropic sector, it means high net worth individuals, corporate foundations, global foundations to partner in structured financial projects. But it also means that we need to include the diversity of philanthropy. So independent philanthropy, community foundations, local philanthropy, which bring local knowledge, local networks, social capital, due diligence, capacity building experiments to build a pipeline of investable projects. Second, philanthropy can help address some of the criticisms that tools like blended finance receive. So one of the biggest criticisms out there is around transparency and accountability, and philanthropy can help bring civil society actors to the table and really show where funding is going. And at the same time, can really make sure that we're prioritizing social and environmental impact to make sure there isn't this case of impact washing and really making sure that funds are going where they're needed most. And in order for all of this cross-sector collaboration to happen at different levels, local, regional, and global, so that there is this translation and connection between local to global, is we need favorable conditions to make sure that partnerships like this can take place. And so with the case made for partnering, what does the current state of partnerships between public development banks and philanthropy really look like? We did a small research project. By no means does it give you the entire story, but it gives you a bit of a pulse. So we did a survey of 55 foundations with our partners, the Partnering Initiative and Louders Foundation. These 55 foundations distribute between 1 million and 50 million annually. And what we found is that while only 20% of foundations said they currently engage with PDBs, 31% plan to increase their collaborations, and yet nearly half remain uncertain about how to do so. The barriers were very clear. high transaction costs, lack of understanding of PDB structures and processes, and misaligned timelines. So this is where we need to come together. We need shared norms, strategies, practical tools, incubating, piloting ideas to really create a playbook and models of what effective collaboration can look like. And so today, this session is really about listening and learning from solutions that are already in the works. In this next hour, we brought together a group of speakers to share some of the cutting-edge projects that involve philanthropy in public-private philanthropy partnerships. And so I'm going to hand it over to our moderator, Sergio Guzma Sukodolski. He comes from the banking world, previously CEO of the Development Bank of Sao Paulo, CEO of the Development Bank of Minas Gerais, Director General at the New Development Bank in Shanghai. He is also a scholar, a critical thinker, and an extremely important thought partner for us as we figure out how we can make collaboration between philanthropy and public development banks happen more and with greater quality. Senior Fellow at the Milken Institute at the Brazilian Center for International Relations, SEBRI, and appointed as a Special Envoy for the Finance and Common Movement. Over to you, Sergio.
Thank you, Samira. What a pleasure to start the day in this panel and reaffirming the continuity with the last edition of the summit in Cartagena, Colombia. At that summit, Maria Neto and I wrote a paper together and had some of our colleagues around the table supporting it. We organized a panel that launched this conversation with networks like Latinpacto, other Latin American philanthropies like Arapiaú, development banks, philanthropies from the global north, such as the Bezos Earth Fund, and many others. At that summit declaration, these kinds of partnerships were captured in terms of the summit agreeing to encourage public development banks to develop a pipeline of potential projects for joint initiatives to work with philanthropies, more private sector actors and philanthropies participating in blended finance mechanism. And the summit also called upon philanthropies to ensure that blended finance mechanisms take into account the local context and the perspective of civil society, and also to leverage the comparative advantage to enter successful collaborations with public development banks. The consensus now is that philanthropy's partnership with public development banks is not just desirable, but is a must. We live in very strange times, and we've been following all around the world attacks to development agencies, development banks, and happily we've been seeing some philanthropies upping their game and filling the gap, not only collaborating as always have done in innovative solutions to finance development and the challenges of our time, but really filling the gap during some troubled times. In this sense, we have here at the Financing Common more than 500 development banks of all shapes and sizes from all around the world. And we believe that philanthropy can unlock capital to expand to other networks, private sector, sovereign wealth funds, and others. We look at examples that are around the table, the African Climate Foundation and how they have supported South Africa's Just Energy Transition Partnership, the JETP, the African Development Bank and Mission 300, M300 Accelerator. Just next to me is Andrew Herskovich, who's leading that effort with his team. The Children's Investment Fund Foundation, which joined other philanthropy at the Global Energy Alliance for People and the Planet, GIAP, and so many other experiences and partnerships which we will discuss and learn more about today. Today, I would like to welcome our speakers, beginning with Madame Hassatou Diop Nsele. She's the Vice President for Finance and Chief Financial Officer at the African Development Bank Group. She's overseeing general capital increases and pioneered hybrid MDB capital. We also have Salim Fakir, the founder and executive director of the African Climate Foundation. We have here our good friend Maria Neto, which has developed a innovative financing at the Inter-American Development Bank before she joined the leading climate foundation in Brazil, the ICS, Institute for Climate and Society, as the executive director. Next to me, as I said, Andrew Herskovich is the CEO of Mission 300, M300 Accelerator at the Rockefeller Catalytic Capital. And at the end, we will have reactions by Catherine Harvey, the Secretary General of Foundations 20, F20, and Leah Kibi, who is the Director and Head of Co-Founding and Partnerships in Africa and Head of Kenya Office at the Children's Investment Fund Foundation. So beginning with Madam Hassatu Nsele, Time magazine has named you as one of the key catalysts for climate change in its second annual Time 100 climate list. They cited your groundbreaking work in introducing the $750 million hybrid bond to scale up climate finance. Can you talk a little bit about that and how philanthropy could be involved? Over to you, Madam. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all the early risers. Thank you very much to Wings and to Fix for this event. So before I go to the hybrid capital, I think that what you said, Samira, and you, Sergio, as well, with regards to the need to have some kind of a coalition of the willing is extremely important, especially in the world that we are in today. And when you listen to Africa, I used to hear about the infrastructure gap. There was the financial and economic crisis and how it hit Africa the most. We had food crisis 1, food crisis 2. We had COVID, inflation, etc. So it's like every year or every 2 or 3 years there is a black swan. And a black swan is supposed to be something that comes every 10 or 20 years, but there's been a flock of black swans, across Africa and the world. So I think that this is where we see we need to be innovative and we need to think outside of the box. And we need to also recognize that business as usual cannot happen anymore. And, philanthropies and MDBs have the same ultimate objective. And, working together is much more powerful and impactful than being alone, which is why that coalition between MDBs and philanthropies, foundation, etc., does make sense. And when I look at the resources, for example, that philanthropies and foundations are able to bring in, we're talking about, I think, $10–15 billion per year. On the world scale, it is limited. So every dollar has to count. Every dollar needs to have a multiplier impact, multiplier effect. And it's about, how do we make this catalytic? So, we've talked about the hybrid capital transaction that we did. It was a 3-year journey because it was an instrument that existed in the financial markets but never used by MDBs. So it was a journey for us, the African Development Bank, of understanding the instrument and seeing how we could adapt it. It was a journey as well for credit rating agencies because the teams that look at the instrument for financial markets were different and the context was totally different, so it had to be looked at. It was a journey for investors. It was a journey as well for the investment banks that we hired to work with us. So it took us 2 to 3 years to get where we were, but it was quite, and the reason why we looked at it is because we've been, since the beginning, at the vanguard of financial innovation. We have a formidable mandate and a limited capital. Actions are to be used only for social projects or for climate-related projects. Extremely successful. We decided to do $750 million, and we got demand for $6 billion. We had more than 250 investors, participating in the transaction, and basically it's the start of a new asset class, and something that we believe going forward is going to be part of the toolkit of MDBs, and we're seeing other institutions coming in. But it was also an important transaction in the sense that we were able to tap private capital in order to further our goals. Because usually we get the resources from the shareholders, public money, and that we leverage. But for the first time, we got private capital, which makes it a different transaction. And I need to thank the incredible team from the African Development Bank that was behind the scenes. There was resilience and commitment, but also everyone that worked around us.
Thank you so much. This is a conversation. I will come back to you in a few minutes again. But now I would like to invite Mr. Salim Fakir from the African Climate Foundation and pose the first question. Good morning, Mr. Fakir. The African Climate Foundation supports and collaborates on the JETPs here in South Africa. As a key philanthropic partner, can you tell us a little bit about ACF, how it has played a convening role to help the government and private sector understand the expectations of each and bring these two sectors together?
Sure. Can you hear me? Yeah, thanks. Morning, everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here. And Samira, thank you, and Casey, and for organizing and pulling this together with your partners. First, let me just highlight a few things about the philosophy of ACF. It was set up 4.5 years ago. We're moving from startup to more structured organization. I think the main philosophy for the establishment of ACF is to consolidate philanthropic funding on the continent. If you really look at all the climate foundations around the world, most of the funding went in regions that were outside of Africa. And the statistic is very clear. Before we started, it was only 2% of about $1 billion, which is ridiculous. It was about $30 million. It's gone to 5%. Hopefully that's because of ACF and other reasons. So that's a very important stat to bear in mind. The continent needs a lot more resources. We hear about the shutdown or closing down of other funding sources. That's becoming a major issue. It's a gap that philanthropy can't fill. So we have to work much more wisely and be able to use our scarce resources in a much more innovative way. I think the third thing is that because we have grant funding, we can take a little bit more risk in terms of the types of innovations we can drive. And that's very important because it's very hard for AFDB and other development finance institutions to do that. You have shareholders you have to answer to, and even also the private sector, that require returns. So a lot of our work is around learning by doing. So we're very happy to, and I can give many examples of how we can use our funding to experiment, but of course in a very cautious and judicious way, because we have to understand what we can catalyze. So we've taken the approach of really trying to focus less on project by project based approaches to more strategic, catalytic, transformative initiatives that can hopefully change the way a whole sector works. For example, in South Africa, it's the electricity sector. And that was pretty much the reasons why the early phase of the design of the South African JETP, it was called other names, by the way. I don't want to go into you can read stuff about that on the internet. Was designed to look at the transformation of the South African electricity sector in order to be able to decarbonize it in a very radical way through injections of larger pools of capital. But in order for that to happen, you needed to have very clear design features, very clear case to be made, investment case that's linked to and nationally determined contribution ambition. So what I think has happened over time is that we've been able to transform the way NDCs work. They're not just pieces of paper, but they tell us the ambition both in mitigation and adaptation, the nature of investment that's required, and what types of capital needs to come behind that. AFDB has contributed or has pledged to contribute 2 billion to the Jet B. I hope that's still on. But that's the kind of approach that we've taken. In the time we've worked with our partners, the Presidential Climate Commission, the President's Office, and many others, including the IPG group, which involves bilateral governments, we have been able to scale up not only the institutional capability, the technical capability to deliver the investment that is required to be implemented and to be invested in different portfolio of projects. ACF, as a result of that learning and that experience, that experimentation, has oriented its own work towards what we call investment platforms. So we don't call it country platforms, we call it investment platforms, that is designed to find ways in which we can do similar types of things in other countries. So we are operating at the moment in 10 countries, where we're looking at both mitigation and adaptation. It's not terms I like using, but it's the climate language, let's put it that way. It's really what those investment platforms are really trying to tie new sources of capital, let's call them climate finance, linked to economic goals of a country, because all these countries are going through debt distress. They require new sources of growth, new sources of capital that can catalyze growth, and they need to diversify their economies. It's very important that we understand that, because many of them are resource dependent, and that's one of the reasons why their economies are the way they are. They extract resources, they export it, and our goal is really to use the investment platform strategies, if we can attract capital from other partners outside of Africa that are looking for new investment opportunities on a continent that requires a lot of infrastructure, that requires build new cities, it has a young population, it has to increase digital access, it needs more manufacturing capacity, increase electrification. All of those things are needed, and you can use the climate lens to support those goals through a strong development agenda. The only way to do that, in my view, is not some more campaigns and advocacy, but really to do real work on the ground, real economy work, and to use the investment platform strategies to define the investment needs, the type of projects that are potentially bankable. There's a lot of projects that need to be financed, but to structure it around a strategic goal rather than just small projects that are living in isolation of the bigger picture. For making grant investments in 28 countries at the moment, and we have a team of about 40 people, which is still expanding. And ACF just finally has two components. The one is this grant investments that we can do at risk. At the same time, once we initiate a lot of investment initiatives across various parts of the continent, there's also a request for us to fiscal host funds on behalf of other funders. And that's an expanding, if you want, business of ACF. So a good example of that, some of our partners, for example, a key component, because we are so focused on driving new investments, there are certain types of technical skills we require that can come from our NDB partners. We also have developed a network using the services of the Allied Talent Partnership, which is a Three Canes philanthropic initiative that sources for 2 to 3 months technical assistance for governments in different regions. For example, at the moment we have a transaction advisor that's supporting the Senegal Sovereign Fund, FONSIS, to capitalize a new fund on renewable energy and efficiency. And those are kinds of examples of things that we can do. But using very scarce philanthropic resources to leverage higher and larger pools of funds. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Now, Maria Neto, you've been Executive Director of the Institute for Climate and Society in Brazil. You've been working with BNDES, with the Inter-American Development Banks, other development banks, not only in Brazil but elsewhere, in many different topics. One of them, a major theme, is the country platforms. As a matter of fact, you just hosted a two-day workshop on the sidelines of this Financing Common Summit here in Cape Town on that theme. What do you hope to achieve this cross-sector collaboration? What kind of actors have you been able to mobilize? And of course, being in Brazil in the run-up to COP30, what do you expect for this year in terms of unrolling and in terms of the portfolio of the work that your institution is doing? And I'm very proud to be part of the board, so over to you.
Thank you, Sergio, and it's really a pleasure to be here again with Wings and to have again in the Financing Common a follow-up on the role of philanthropies and public banks, how we can collaborate. A couple of things. I think in terms of philanthropy, I think as Salim was saying, our role is of course not to resolve everything, but is to be very incisive on where we can have a difference, make a difference. And in particular in this area of trying to scale ambition on climate change. My philanthropy is more focusing on climate change and how climate change is relating to development. A big thing that's coming is precisely, I would say, as overall topic, is we can't see anymore the problems of climate impacts, the opportunities in terms of what we need to do for changing development patterns, as climate just being an environmental issue or additional issue. It has to be mainstreamed in the way we conceive development. Also, I think this is a very important topic for philanthropies to think, but also for public banks to think about how we work together in actually talking about new development patterns, how we talk together on how we are integrating the cost of impacts of climate change on the day-to-day lives and so on. And then specifically, of course, one of these areas we need to work with is how we leverage investments, or how we can make finance, which is what public banks do mainly, more, efficient to divert and diversify, or to direct investments in the right direction. And in terms of philanthropy also, how we can open spaces like the one we are having here to dialogue what is needed really to be done, because public banks are interesting players. They can take some risks that private sector cannot take. Their role is to unlock private sector investments and to actually also promote innovation, right? But they also have limitations. Some things public banks cannot do, particularly national banks, because they are regulated banks. And they cannot take certain types of risks, or sometimes also not be able to quick start or develop something from scratch with their own balanced resources. So that is where we can have ways to work together. I think Salim mentioned on the seed monies of designing and thinking about new innovative ways to operate. And also, it's not the case of us, but of course philanthropies can also blend resources with public banks. Now, as Philanthropy X has been also working on this dialogue since last year on the G20, since we are here, Financing Common, but also at the G20 South Africa startup, a lot of the work we saw that is very relevant for Brazil, but of course for the agenda of climate in general in the world, is how we can move the sustainable finance agenda to direct investments more efficiently, and what's the role of the G20 on that. And the G20 opened a number of initiatives. There is quite a few topics. I will not go into all of them here. But one of them was to say we need to help countries to have ownership on what is their capacity to understand how they mobilize resources, public, private, concessional, commercial, domestic, and international. It's not just about concessional international finance for climate, and it's not only about the country alone, and it's not only about the public, but it's also about the private. So this is not simple. How we are thinking about the situations of different contexts of countries for them to mobilize resources. So this concept of country platforms basically come from a conversation already since India, G20, which is continuing with Brazil now and South Africa on how governments can operate in a more, let's say, catalytic manner and have strategies that combine their resources with private sector resources and international resources, and what are these strategies of bringing these people together. So we were very pleased that while we were doing this, supporting the dialogue on what would be this kind of ownership and innovation, we also could work with the Public Bank of Brazil, BNDES, the government of Brazil, and private sector to think about what was needed to develop in Brazil the Brazilian Investment Platform, which was launched last year. The Brazilian Investment Platform is quite innovative because it does not only focus on one sector only, as it was the case of the initial just energy transition platforms. It's a bit broad to what Brazil thinks is the needs it wants to focus on, industry, nature-based, and energy as well. But I think the important, again, on our role as philanthropy was what was this design? What was the type of way of delinking to private sector? So we, for example, as philanthropy, in addition to support the design of the platform, we created a laboratory for nature-based solutions with a lot of our grantees, our political situation you were mentioning, and every year having a new black swan, how we are looking at helping countries in a pragmatic manner to the next Belém plus 10 implementation phase, have some kind of trust building. We didn't have a lot of trust building in the last COPs. We left the last COP29 with a lot of problems on the climate finance agenda. And so working on, again, country platforms, and now not thinking only about Brazil. South Africa did it one way, Brazil the other. But for example, in Africa, we are here, a number of countries were affected by climate change to the point that their GDP was affected by it. I've been participating in dialogues where I saw some of the countries saying, I'm not being able to develop because I have a fiscal constraint. I have already a debt problem, and then every year I'm being hit by these climate impacts, and this is affecting me and my population. So how we work also with these countries to mobilize resources, to think about how they have to get organized to have their country platforms to resolve that. So this, for us, is an important topic towards COP30, and is an area where public banks can have a role, because they can be the kind of convener of working public-private. But the public banks alone, again, cannot do it. And that's where I think the philanthropies come again. We can help with this kind of more innovation, design, the dialogues that sometimes they are not having with the civil society, the types of dialogues, and even the bridge that is needed sometimes with the private sector, because they do have a lot of knowledge about the local financial systems. But not always with the actual private sector developers doing projects. So I think this is an area where there is a lot of opportunity for us to combine efforts, and in Brazil has been quite a successful case. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. Now, Andrew, it's your turn. Mission 300 Accelerator, which is has the full support of the Rockefeller Foundation, helped set up the Global Energy Alliance for People and the Planet, GAP. We saw the announcement last month during Africa Energy Summit in Dar es Salaam that Mission 300 Accelerator will start 23 new energy access projects in 11 African countries. Can you tell us a little bit about GAP and how philanthropy is playing a role in bringing actors and catalytic capital together for a sustainable energy transition in sub-Saharan Africa? Over to you, Andrew.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. I suspect that at some point this morning, every single person in this room reflected on what's going on in the world right now. How did we get to the point where there's so many people who just don't seem to really care about other people in the world. We're watching foreign assistance basically disappear from a lot of countries, and I think a lot of us are questioning the values of human beings and everything that got us into what we're doing right now, that drove us into this profession. We're wondering how our neighbors can feel this way. But I would submit that a lot of people in the same room are taking a similar approach. And what I mean by that is we're so heavily focused on the climate agenda and carbon emissions that we're forgetting about climate justice. We're forgetting about the people, the 600 million people on the African continent who don't have access to electricity, who don't really care about emissions, and they're not responsible for them. And they don't have the ability to even communicate about what climate justice means to them because they don't have electricity, they don't have a light bulb, they don't have internet, they don't have any of these things. And so when we talk about Mission 300 is 100% about climate justice, and every foundation out there that's working on climate has a role to play in eliminating energy poverty and solving this completely solvable problem. The Rockefeller Foundation, along with several other foundations, a few years ago created the Global Energy Alliance for People and Planet. And for the last few years, it's been heavily focused on the planet part, like many people in this room. And now we're getting caught up on the people part. And we've been working closely with the African Development Bank, the World Bank, Sustainable Energy for All, which is in charge of trying to drive SDG 7. And we're going to try to solve this problem, not through crazy innovative solutions, but by doing exactly what the Global South is calling for in changing the global financial architecture. We're seeing an unprecedented amount of IDA funding, African Development Fund money, which is basically cheap money. That's what countries need. They need inexpensive capital. We don't have to create complicated financing mechanisms. We need low interest and no interest loans. We look at development finance institutions, many that are in this room, and I've been a big supporter and a big critic of the structuring of the DFIs and the MDBs, because none of them should be structured in a way to really be focusing on making money. Their role is lost on this innovative transaction. Should it be philanthropy? It's really not the role of philanthropy to do that. It's the role of development institutions to do that. But philanthropies, because they've come forward in such a big way, in so many ways, we give them public institutions a pass. But the shareholders of these institutions, of your institutions, they need to rethink what the model is and get it right. One of the things that we're doing with Mission 300 is we're supporting the IFC in creating an equity fund that will invest in distributed renewable energy, because that's the only way that we're going to get to many of the people who don't have access to electricity. And I can tell you that I have struggled to find a handful of institutions that are willing to take a junior tranche. And by junior tranche, I mean 0 to 5% return, not even a loss. And I found them, but it's a handful of them, and it's none of the groups that are in this room right now, and it shouldn't be that difficult. The global financial architecture needs to be changed, and we all need to do it. And we need to be making the case that, sure, the days of pure foreign assistance may be over, but we can leverage a fraction of that foreign assistance money and that grant money to provide better financing. When I was at the Development Finance Corporation in the U.S., I would say, if you were to take $1 billion away from USAID and give half of that back to the U.S. taxpayer, and then give the other half of that to DFC and say, now structure deals in a way where you can give countries and people the type of financing and small businesses that they need to grow, not finance in U.S. dollars, and create sustainable financing, you'll turn that $500 million and probably to $5 billion or $50 billion of sustainable development. We all need to rethink what we're doing. That's what we're doing with Mission 300. The accelerator is helping the World Bank and the African Development Bank, which have 130 projects identified that will lead to energy access for 300 million people by 2030. We're helping plug the gaps. We're doing the studies that are needed. We're hiring the consultants that are needed. We're building capacity within governments. We're helping governments deliver. A lot of the countries that don't have energy access, they don't have, they're small governments, they don't necessarily have enough people. So we're focused on the bread and butter of what we know works. A lot of the people, or everybody who's working on it's been in this space for a while. Sometimes it's building out the grid. Sometimes it's solar home systems. Sometimes it's mini grids. We're trying to just get costs down. 78% of the people who don't have access to electricity, and I said this yesterday, can't even afford the $5 a month for a solar home system. So if we think that we're going to use our financing tools in a business as usual way to solve this problem, we're not. And it doesn't fall on philanthropy to solve this problem. It falls on the public institutions to do this. We care about our neighbors. But it does fall on philanthropy as well to focus your efforts on caring about your neighbors, caring about others, and not focused on issues that frankly impact the 600 million people who don't have access to electricity, but aren't going to solve the problem for them. They have to take the approach. We need all the hands on deck from everyone to solve this issue. It's solvable, and it's embarrassing that we haven't solved it to date.
Thank you so much, Andrew. We don't have much time, and there is a possibility that we're kicked out, although I would like to spend all day here talking about the topics. I will give you the floor again, Madam Anseli, and then afterwards I will invite our two very prestigious commentators, Leah and Catherine, to also interview. The floor is yours, Madam Anseli. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to react to what Andrew said. I think that there are no boxes about what we should do, what we shouldn't do. What we have is an objective, we have a goal. And how do we get there? So whatever we've done, some of it have worked and some of it hasn't worked. So we need to be innovative and find ways to get to that target. And today, that road is even more difficult because of the current situation that we're facing. The amount of resources that we thought we were going to have at one point in time are going to be different. So do we sit back and say we don't do it? Absolutely not. It's about reinventing ourselves and reinventing how we work together. And again, for the philanthropies, they have a role to play. And the resources, and I really like what I heard about catalytic, you talked about incisive, a neighbor, etc. And coming together is going to get us there. And I realized that I did not respond to your questions about philanthropies and hybrid capital. They can help. And here we want to have a demonstration effect. It's about inciting countries also to use that instrument. It's about having an instrument that makes sense in terms of cost. And we've been working with philanthropies, engaging more with them and understand. But it's again, they're a journey, a learning process, indicating about what we the instrument and understanding how we can make better use of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to invite Leah Kibi. She's with the Children's Investment Fund Foundation to join the conversation and also intervene here. Leah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Those were very insightful elements, and I think what is significantly enabling here is that we're speaking to actual live realities and case studies. M300 is a reality. The FDB hybrid capital conversation is a reality. The Africa Climate Foundation is a reality, and I think the role of such conversations is to bring the dialogues together. It's two frames of what I'm taking away, and the role of philanthropy to really try advance this quality of innovative financing. I'm asking myself, have we landed with the enablers? Because I think these enablers, what I'm hearing across is there's still pockets of fragmented capital, there's still information asymmetry, and potentially what are the enablers that can really get us navigating these two dimensions, which potentially don't get us to the scale, the speed, and the impact that we are looking for. I think part of the enablers as we speak on the fragmentation of capital or the information asymmetry is a bit more focused on how we're bringing forward the projects, how we're bringing forward these big ideas that need to be invested, and what does core design look like with local partners. I think the other question that we also putting forward on the table is we've rallied philanthropic capital alongside de-risking spaces, but I'm asking myself, is it de-risking plus? Because the role of just playing a de-risking role will not potentially bring the full scale of sustainability of financing. So we could blend as much as we could, but if our razor focus is not on a case of sustainability, which is my second point, then we will still find ourselves in having some sort of a reaction play for Africa. And as you mentioned, if aid moves out, what is Africa doing? You know, so how are we then using philanthropic capital to really start pathways of de-risking plus? And that plus sign is what brings me to my second point, which is sustainability. And I think all the panelists have mentioned it in one way or another. I've had the play of ownership, and that's where we're bringing the country investment platforms and really making sure that we are plugging in very particular plays that are responsive to the different governments. You know, with Africa 54 countries, it's not a one-size-fits-all. And that's why the country investment platforms, I think, for me, are quite exciting. When I come again to sustainability, I'm asking myself speed. And speed means you have to be at a level that brings systemic change. I think the M300 is quite exciting because you have to really level up. The small fragmented conversations won't get us there. And so really looking at some of these scalable and very systemic direction places, but also appreciating that there's a role of innovation and looking at what does that balance look like. I think my last case on sustainability, which has really been spoken into, and Africa has really rallied on this fit-for-purpose financing structures, it's really the cost of capital, and trying to see then how do we play in the capital space to make sure that you know, the capital or the pools of funding that are being brought together are at a price point that does not leave Africa disenfranchised. My last point is that in the whole development impact play, I think we really have to anchor economic growth and trade. That's what becomes the last level of sustainability. Development will not be about a single conversation if you're not really bringing the nexus of trade and growth alongside it. So those are my key takeaways, and thank you so much.
Okay, wasn't sure. Thank you so much, and also thank you for having partnering with us on this with Wings and all of the partners in this conversation. Of course, I agree with everything that Leah said, and just a few points on my reflections of today. There's several steps that all the actors in the room or outside this room have to take, and one of them is what I'm hearing is that on the one hand is just we're starting to remember who we are and what our roles are. So that's one of the things is that I heard also for the development bank conversations today. Is like it's the development and not the return on investment that you should be focusing on. And then once we clarified again, going back to why were we established and what is our role in this conversation, is then we can look at reinvention and innovation and seeing, okay, how do we work together as a group of actors and stakeholders that have the specific roles and the specific abilities in terms of also the amount of money that we can spend, the impacts that we can have, the roles and the ideas that we have. And for that, I think we need this continuation of these open conversations that we're having here, where we have a trusted environment, where we can really come in and say, okay, here, this is my boundary, this is how far I can go with what I can do, and this is where I need you to step in, and this is how we can actually then develop the kind of collaboration that we need in a space that is currently so geopolitically charged, and we are seeing these shifts and these transformations around aid and the development financing and who is paying for what and how can we get the private sector in. I think the conversation of including private sector in these conversations is not a new one. We've been talking about this for decades. So it is time, and it is kind of embarrassing that we haven't been able to solve these kinds of problems yet. One of the things, and I also agree here with Leo and Leah and with the other speakers in the room, is that the country platforms or investment platforms, and however you want to name them, are a very good start because it will help us think more systemically and holistically when it comes to the different topics that we all are trying to solve at the same time. And here I'm hearing again also Maria saying that we need to, for example, climate needs to be mainstreamed. It does affect every aspect of a development cooperation and every aspect of economic development. So we really have to make sure that if we have these country platforms and if we do them well and if we define them and describe them in a way that people understand what we mean, then I can see a lot of potential in this to move forward. And then the last point, and this goes back to the Finance in Common Summit, but also the activities that we're looking in this year. We have the Finance for Development conference coming up in the summer, European summer. And so there's definitely still a lot of space of reforming when it comes to the international financial architecture to develop better systems of access to climate, to capital, the cost of capital, making it easier for countries but also individual stakeholders, grassroots organizations, funds, feminist funds, indigenous funds to actually access the climate finance that is out there and that is still untapped. So there's still a lot of potential there that we can work together. But yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for having us. And back to, I don't know, Sergio or Samira. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I see that we have another panel after us. I know we are all sad. As I said, we could continue this all day. I think some of us can meet outside and continue the conversation. In any ways, this is an ongoing dialogue. It started in Cartagena, Colombia, also a beautiful city at the previous fixed edition. As I said in the beginning, Maria and I published a paper called Philanthropies and Public Development Banks No Longer Strangers. I think it was a very interesting title that we picked for that. We had the support from Wings Network since the very beginning, including for that paper and many other partners, development banks and philanthropies. And I would love to continue this dialogue, publishing and connecting and learning about what you are doing, and specifically to your two comments, bringing those solutions to the last mile, right? All of us are, many of us are working very close to the terrain. Many of us are working with institutions that have very low rating, that have, very expensive cost of capital, very expensive access to technology and solutions to really make those resources reach where they need to reach. And the solutions that we've been discussing and the projects that have been presented here today really give us hope and also an opportunity for knowledge transfer and all kinds of collaborations, which is our end goal. This is the main theme behind the Finance in Common initiative and specifically this ongoing dialogue. So thank you everyone, especially those who were part of the panel and those who are here with us today. It's a wrap. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the Finance in Common Summit here in Cape Town. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Nice meeting you as well. I'm a good friend of Gareth Phillips. Oh.